Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and leave a comment saying where you're watching from. It all really helps me out in the algorithm. With that said, let's get down to business. On a warm Thursday in February 2021, Naomi Bolivar told her parents she was going to walk at the Ann Kolb Nature Center in Hollywood, Florida. It was a place she loved for its serene trails and birdwatching spots. She left home around 4 p.m. to catch a bus, and even sent a cheerful selfie to a friend from an observation tower in the park around 6 p.m. But minutes later, Naomi stopped responding to messages, and by 6:15 that evening, her phone had gone dark, flickering on mysteriously only hours after she went missing. She never made it to her planned 7 p.m. Zoom meeting that night, and her family's concern quickly escalated from there. Outwardly, Naomi was a devout member of her church and an avid self-described nature girl who spent countless hours watching birds and exploring the outdoors. In late 2020, she graduated from Brigham Young University, Idaho, with a degree in wildlife ecology, hoping to work for the National Park Service one day. Naomi also coped with high-functioning autism, and while she was very bright, her family noted that she tended to be naive socially. By early 2021, she was living at home, searching for jobs. She was disappointed about missing out on an internship at Everglades National Park, but she was already applying to other opportunities and stayed optimistic. February 11th, 2021, started like any other day for Naomi. That afternoon, she told her mother she needed some fresh air and planned to visit the nearby nature preserve to clear her head. Surveillance footage later confirmed Naomi boarded a Broward County bus alone around 4:30 that afternoon. She was seen disembarking near the Ann Kolb Nature Center along the Intracoastal Waterway. For the next hour or so, Naomi wandered the trails and took in the scenery. At about 6 p.m., she was at the park's observation tower enjoying the view. She took a selfie from that vantage point and sent it via Snapchat to a close college friend in another state, texting casually about her day. Nothing seemed amiss in their conversation. It was just a normal, casual exchange, according to the friend. However, shortly after that 6 p.m. check-in, all communication from Naomi ceased. By 6:15 p.m., she was no longer replying to her friend's messages, and attempts to call her phone went straight to voicemail. The sudden silence was alarming given how responsive Naomi typically was. She had planned to attend a young adults Bible study on Zoom at 7 o'clock. When her brother texted to ask where she was, there was no reply. Around 7:30, just 30 minutes after that Zoom meeting was supposed to begin, they contacted the Hollywood Police Department and reported their daughter missing. Now, I'm all for early reporting of missing people, but this does seem quite unusual to me. At least from what's publicly known, she hadn't responded to some text messages, and she was 30 minutes late for a non-essential Zoom meeting. Personally, I would still be thinking along the lines of maybe her phone ran out of battery as she lost track of time by 7:30. That said, given her diagnosis of autism, this may explain why her family was so eager to report her missing immediately. Police sprang into action surprisingly quickly given the timeline, and again I have to assume that this may have been due to the fact that Naomi is autistic. Officers hurriedly scoured the darkening park and surrounding areas that first night, but a 2-hour search under floodlights yielded nothing. By the next morning, dozens of volunteers, many from Naomi's Mormon church, were out canvassing the area and handing out flyers. They plastered missing person posters on street corners and trekked through the trails, desperate to find any clue of Naomi's whereabouts. Her father, Jose, scoured the area day and night on his own, methodically logging each place he searched as he refused to give up. Eventually, law enforcement also deployed canine units, drones, and helicopters to scour the 1,500-acre nature preserve. Despite these massive efforts, nothing turned up. No discarded belongings, no signs of a struggle, and no witnesses who saw her leave the park. Naomi had vanished into thin air among the mangroves and marshes she loved. Investigators did turn up a couple of puzzling clues, though none led to a resolution. Hollywood police discovered that on the night of February 11th, Naomi's cell phone pinged a tower near the Hollywood Beach boardwalk around 11. This was roughly 3 miles south of the nature center. Officers rushed to that area, but they found no sign of Naomi, and shortly afterward, her phone either died or was switched off. In the weeks that followed, there was no activity on her bank account or social media, suggesting she never accessed money or contacted anyone online after she vanished. In a strange twist about a month later, someone briefly powered on Naomi's phone and even initiated a group text chat with a few of her friends. However, the person who did this sent no messages and then shut the phone off again, never to turn it back on again. This bizarre event raised hopes that Naomi might still be alive, or at least that someone had her phone, but ultimately, it revealed nothing. Some have suggested, including a private investigator hired by her family, that Naomi left on her own accord to start a new life. This idea gained significant traction because weeks passed with no evidence of kidnapping or any crime whatsoever. Notably, the National Missing Persons Database entry says that the authorities don't believe that foul play was involved in this case, but I'll be coming back to that shortly. The private investigator noted that Naomi had been grappling with serious inner conflicts regarding her faith. He speculated that these struggles might have driven her to escape the strict expectations of her church and family life. Indeed, the fact that police found no signs of foul play, no struggle, no suspect, no crime scene, gives some weight to the runaway theory. However, those who know Naomi strongly dispute this theory. She left home that day with no money, no credit cards, and not even an ID on her. Nothing one would take if planning to be gone long. Close friends insist she wasn't the type to suddenly run off without a word, and she never expressed any desire to leave home or cut ties. That said, if she had been doubting her Mormon faith and her involvement in that community, it seems unlikely to me that she would be expressing those ideas to true believers. There are a number of credible theories about what happened to Naomi. Naomi's loved ones have feared from the start that a predator might have crossed her path that day. The nature park and the nearby boardwalk were open to the public, so a stranger could have approached her even in daylight. Given Naomi's trusting nature, her social maturity was akin to that of a young teenager according to her family. She might have been especially vulnerable to manipulation or deceit. Her family worries that she could have been taken against her will, perhaps even targeted by traffickers. However, investigators haven't uncovered any solid evidence to confirm an abduction and clearly doubt this theory, putting them at odds with the family. There were no eyewitnesses or reports of a disturbance at the park, and no clear clues on surveillance cameras aside from the bus video. Of course, it's possible an abductor lured Naomi away without anyone noticing. The late-night ping of her phone by the beach is intriguing. Maybe someone drove her or at least moved her phone to that spot, but it ultimately revealed nothing concrete. Another theory is that Naomi's disappearance resulted from a tragic accident in the wild. The Unsolved Nature Center is full of mangrove thickets and waterways, and it's possible she wandered off the trail and got into trouble out of sight. She might have slipped, fallen into water, or even encountered a dangerous animal. But this scenario seems less likely given what followed. The intensive searches with dogs, drones, and volunteers found no trace of Naomi within the park. Moreover, her phone's later location near the boardwalk suggests she did make it out of the preserve that evening, or at the very least, her phone did. Unless something or someone carried her phone there without her, it implies Naomi left the park area, one way or another. While an accident can't be completely ruled out, Most view it as unlikely due to the lack of evidence and the phone data pointing away from the wilderness. While it's completely speculative at this time, others suggest that she was a voluntary runaway. According to this theory, she may have been questioning who she was attracted to, and this could have caused problems with her deeply religious family. According to this theory, Naomi didn't wipe her search history before her disappearance, and there were a whole bunch of questions about the status of gay people in Mormonism. There are numerous claims online that she was taken into an unofficial program designed for people who want to part ways with the Mormon Church. That said, these claims are unsubstantiated and may not have any basis in reality. However, I find this highly unlikely, given that there's an active Name Us database entry for her case. This database is run by the Department of Justice and is designed to be used by law enforcement to share information on missing people. Naomi was an adult when she went missing, and there's nothing stopping an adult from simply leaving. If she left voluntarily through such a group, as has been speculated, I don't see why they wouldn't have simply reached out to the authorities to call off the search. Nearly 5 years later, Naomi Bolivar's fate is still unknown, and her case remains an unsolved mystery. Hollywood police say they have never closed the investigation and still welcome any new tips as to her whereabouts. On a warm summer night in 2012, in the quiet town of Palmyra, Pennsylvania, 21-year-old Courtney Stufer vanished from her apartment without a trace. Her green car was still parked outside with the windows down, and inside her home were eerie signs of sudden absence. Her purse, full with her cash and phone, lay by the bed. Her shoes and keys sat by the stairs, and even her dog was left behind. Everything of hers remained, except Courtney herself. The night leading up to Courtney's disappearance was chaotic, to say the least. It began around 9 on July 28, 2012, when police arrived at the Palmyra apartment she shared with her boyfriend, Brad Herr, to break up a loud party. Officers found underage drinking and arrested Brad, who was under 21 and on house arrest, infuriating Courtney and causing tensions with her neighbors. She believed her neighbors, particularly 45-year-old Todd Saksek, had tipped off authorities. Later that night, hoping to cool off, Courtney went out with friends. She met up with 29-year-old Cody Pruitt and others at a bar in Hummelstown, then continued on to downtown Harrisburg. Around closing time, Courtney got into a heated argument with another patron's girlfriend at a club and was kicked out by security. After regrouping, this group of rowdy friends headed back to Palmyra. Cody, the designated driver, dropped everyone else off and then followed Courtney to her apartment around 3 to make sure she got home safely. Almost immediately upon returning home, Courtney became embroiled in another confrontation with her neighbors. Still angry about her boyfriend's arrest, she accused the downstairs couple and Todd of calling the cops on her. The shouting escalated enough that a neighbor called 911 at about 3:12, even claiming Courtney had kicked Todd during the fray. Police arrived by 3:15 and broke up the drunken shouting match, ordering everyone back inside. Courtney and Cody retreated to her apartment, but the peace was short-lived. At 4:12 a.m., Todd phoned police yet again to complain that Courtney was stomping and screaming in her apartment to antagonize him. Officers returned around 4:30 a.m. to find an oddly quiet scene. Todd met them outside, but when police knocked on Courtney's door, no one answered. The lights were off and nothing seemed amiss. They only heard her dog woofing it up briefly when they knocked. "And yeah, you heard me," I said, woofing it up. With no sign of trouble, the officers left at 4:36 that morning, unknowingly becoming the last people to potentially document any trace of this aggressive woman. That Sunday, July 29th, alarm bells rang when Courtney missed a planned meetup with her family and failed to answer her phone. By evening, her mother went to check on her. Courtney's car was out front, and the apartment door was unlocked. Inside, all of Courtney's personal belongings, her cell phone, purse, money, keys, even the cigarettes she couldn't live without, were still there. Worse still, her dog was alone in the apartment, apparently abandoned there. There were no signs of any struggle or forced entry. Courtney herself was simply gone. Her family reported her missing to Palmyra police on July 30th, when she still hadn't turned up. Law enforcement sprang into action. In the following days, search teams with canines combed through fields, backyards, and woods around Palmyra. Despite exhaustive efforts, nothing concrete was found. Not a drop of blood or a single clue turned up. Meanwhile, Courtney's family and friends plastered the area with missing person flyers and pleaded for any information, but no promising leads emerged. Notably, the FBI also got involved in the investigation early on, suspecting foul play was involved. With scant evidence, several theories have emerged about what might have happened in those murky pre-dawn hours. One person in focus was Cody Pruitt, the friend who stayed over and was last to see her. Cody told police that when he woke around 7 a.m. and couldn't find Courtney, he assumed she had stepped out. He left, even texting her later that morning when she didn't reappear. Security camera footage confirmed Cody stopping at a convenience store around 7:30 a.m., consistent with his account. Police questioned Cody and a friend named Milton Rodriguez, who had been with them earlier, and searched their vehicles for any evidence. Cody cooperated fully, and he passed a polygraph and volunteered a DNA sample to investigators, though there was nothing to test it against. Authorities eventually stated that neither he nor Milton were considered suspects in the case. Another theory centers on the neighbor feud. Many wonder if the bad blood between Courtney and her neighbors, especially Todd, could have turned lethal after the police left. Courtney had complained to friends and family that Todd made her uncomfortable. About a week before she vanished, she told her mom that this neighbor had been videotaping her and acting creepy, making her genuinely scared. However, there's no proof that these allegations are true, and Courtney is documented as acting highly belligerently towards Todd, as well as numerous other people. Further yet, some have speculated that even if Todd was videotaping her, he was documenting her conduct in hopes of getting her evicted. After Courtney disappeared, it emerged that Todd had left an angry voicemail for their landlord, threatening to take matters into his own hands if Courtney wasn't evicted. Police did search Todd's apartment and car about a week later, but found no physical evidence linking him to the disappearance. Todd cooperated and completely denied involvement, and has never been named as a suspect in this case. Finally, some have proposed the possibility of a random foul play scenario, or that she may have made other enemies who have stayed off the radar. This theory is difficult to prove, and there's essentially no evidence to indicate that this was the case. More than a decade later, Courtney Stauffer's fate is still unknown, and her case remains a mystery. Hey everyone, Jimmy here once again, reminding you to like and subscribe and tap the notification bell and turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to hit that join button if you want to toss me a clam or two directly. Picture the Austrian Alps in 1779, cold winds sweeping across jagged peaks, pine forests whispering secrets to the valleys below. One evening, deep in the wilderness, a traveler stumbles upon something that has no place in the known world. Not one creature, but two, sleek, sinuous bodies like serpents, crowned with feline heads that watch with eerie intelligence. The sight is so wrong, so primal in its horror, that the witness bolts for home, words tumbling out in a panic, heart giving out before the tale can even settle in. This isn't just a fable. but a typical encounter with one of the most infamous creatures whispered about in the dark corners of alpine legend. Half cat, half dragon, all nightmare, it stalks the boundary between myth and nature, leaving behind claw marks and strange tracks. Long before it had a specific name, the Tatzelwurm was simply a dragon. The remote, rugged landscapes of the Alps in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy were fertile ground for such tales. For centuries, locals believed these mountains were home to monstrous serpents, or Draco, whose poisonous breath could sicken a man. The legend began to solidify in the 17th and 18th centuries, when early naturalists started cataloging these accounts not as myths, but as potential zoological discoveries. They recorded incredible testimonies. A four-legged, cat-faced mountain dragon that reared up to the height of a man, a creature whose breath caused headaches and dizziness, and another blamed for mysteriously scaring the milk out of the local cows. While later generations would ridicule these scholars for their credulity, they were operating in an era before the firm line between natural and supernatural had been drawn. They were treating these sightings with an open-mindedness expected of the time, and after all, they existed in a time where something like an okapi would have been a fantasy creature. Sifting through centuries of eyewitness accounts reveals a creature of startling contradictions. Its body is almost always described as serpentine or lizard-like, but its size varies wildly, from a manageable 2 feet to a terrifying 7 feet or more in length. The body itself is often called thick and stubby, with skin that could be smooth and whitish, or covered in dark scales so tough that one hunter claimed his knife couldn't pierce it. The biggest inconsistency lies in its limbs. The most common description is of a creature with 2 powerful clawed front legs but no hind legs, forcing it to slither along the ground. Yet other reports claim it has 4 small, almost useless legs, while some accounts insist it has no legs at all. This lack of a consistency has always been a major hurdle for those trying to prove its existence. Despite these variations, one feature remains uncannily consistent: its head. Over and over, witnesses describe the Tatzelwurm as having the face of a cat, complete with a rounded head and large, piercing eyes. In 1828, a peasant supposedly found a carcass, but it was lost in transit to a professor, as tends to happen when you find a cat dragon, I suppose. The legend leaped from folklore to front-page news in 1934 with the publication of the Balkan photograph. A Swiss photographer, known only as Balkan, claimed he was trying to take a picture of a log when it suddenly moved. He snapped a photo that appeared to show the blunt, lizard-like head of a strange creature peeking out. Also, if you're one of those people who just listen, check this thing out now, and tell me if you're seeing a cat-faced dragon here or not. The public was captivated, and the newspaper even sponsored an expedition to find the beast. But the search turned up nothing, and interest quickly died down. The photograph is now widely considered a hoax, likely a cleverly staged model. Personally, though, I have to believe it's literally just a weird-looking log, or potentially even a decaying fish, rather than a model. I mean, if you were going to use an actual model, you'd probably want to make it look like the creature as it's described. Notably, the most recent rash of sightings occurred in the German-speaking part of northern Italy, South Tyrol, in 2009. For all my tennis fans in the audience, this is the place that my boy Yannick Sinner is from. In a sad twist, it was discovered that these sightings of a mysterious lizard in the Alps were in fact real monitor lizards that had been abandoned by an unscrupulous breeder. There are a number of theories that try to explain why this creature has been consistently reported over the course of history. One of the most popular ideas is that it's a type of undiscovered giant amphibian. The Japanese giant salamander, for example, can grow up to 5 feet long and has a serpentine body and front claws, matching key parts of the description. Others suggest it could be a member of the siren family of salamanders. These axolotl-like salamanders possess only two front legs and a long eel-like body. However, they live underwater and are only found in North America. Also, like I said, they resemble axolotls and would be impossible to confuse for cats. Still others suggest that it may simply be a cat seen under poor lighting conditions in an unusual place, explaining the feline appearance of this cat dragon. Judge John Fairbanks was a pillar of the small town of Newport, New Hampshire. A lifelong resident of the area, Fairbanks had served on the Newport District Court bench for over 30 years. He also ran a successful private law practice specializing in handling wills, estates, and trust funds for local families. To neighbors and colleagues, he was known as honest and helpful, often assisting widows and overseeing the finances of those who trusted him implicitly. Beneath that respected image, however, Fairbanks was hiding a devastating secret. For years, he had been siphoning money from the very clients who relied on his integrity. So gather around while I tell you the twisted tale of Justice Fairbanks, a local judge who broke bad and left behind more questions than answers. In August 1987, one of Fairbanks's longtime clients, Patricia Sawyer, entrusted him with her stock certificates as part of updating her will. She had been relying on Fairbanks for financial advice since her husband's death decades earlier. But after the stock market crash on October 19, 1987, the infamous Black Monday, Patricia noticed something alarming. Her regular dividend checks stopped arriving. When she pressed Fairbanks for answers, he brushed her off with a convoluted explanation. He claimed the crash had hurt the value of her stocks and said he was withholding her dividend checks to prevent further losses, an excuse that did little for her growing concern. Around the same time, another client began to question Fairbanks's handling of funds. John Tweedy, who had made Judge Fairbanks the legal guardian of his mentally incapable brother's trust, met with the judge in late 1988 and felt something was deeply wrong. Fairbanks evaded Tweedy's questions about the status of the trust accounts, raising red flags. Determined to get answers, Tweedy launched his own inquiry into the records. What he found was disturbing: stock sales that didn't add up and dividend payments that were far lower than they should have been. In total, at least $20,000 was unaccounted for in his brother's fund. Armed with evidence of apparent theft, Tweedy went to the police and reported Judge Fairbanks in early 1989. Law enforcement investigators soon discovered that these were not isolated incidents. As they dug into Fairbanks's finances, they were astonished at what they found. Despite the judge earning a substantial sum of money, they found that he was living far beyond his means in a way that was completely incomprehensible. To give just one example, it turned out Fairbanks owned numerous lavish houses. This lifestyle only made sense if he had an income well above his judicial appointment and the income he derived from his small part-time law practice. However, even then, he had his defenders, with many believing he was simply a brilliant investor, or that perhaps he had more family money than he had let on. But then things started to get even more suspicious, and he began to take actions which would alarm even his supporters. In June 1989, under growing scrutiny, the 66-year-old Fairbanks abruptly resigned his judgeship after more than 3 decades on the bench. He retreated to his summer house in Maine, while authorities expanded their investigation into his client accounts. Once John Tweedy's accusations became public, the floodgates opened. Other clients of Fairbanks came forward with their own tales of missing money. Patricia Sawyer herself discovered that Fairbanks had been moving her assets without permission. By the time she confronted the truth, Patricia had lost an estimated $500,000 of her investments to Fairbanks's dealings. Case by case, the pattern became clear. Judge Fairbanks had been systematically draining the accounts of the people who trusted him. The judge had specialized in quote-unquote helping widows and disabled people, a fact which he was lauded for. However, in retrospect, this almost certainly meant that this financial predator likely saw these people as vulnerable prey to take advantage of. By late 1989, investigators concluded that Fairbanks's embezzlement was staggering in scope. For perhaps 20 years, he had been stealing his clients' funds to enrich himself. Early estimates put the theft at about $1.8 million over a 6-year period. But as more victims emerged, authorities feared the true total was far higher. Some investigators believed he had stolen upwards of $10 million through dozens of fraudulent transactions over 2 decades. Since the thefts occurred over the course of 20 years, it's impossible to say what the inflation-adjusted value of this was. However, even if we assume every cent was stolen in 1989, which it wasn't, this amount is still $25 million adjusted for inflation. The respected local judge had, in essence, robbed his community on a massive scale. In the fall of 1989, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office prepared to bring Fairbanks to justice. Investigators even spoke with the former judge at his main retreat as they built the case, and Fairbanks tentatively agreed to come in for a formal meeting with prosecutors. But when the day came, he never showed up. Sensing that Fairbanks might try to run, authorities moved quickly to finalize charges. On December 28, 1989, a Sullivan County grand jury indicted John C. Fairbanks on 4 counts of theft. The indictments detailed more than 100 instances in which Fairbanks had written checks, transferring money from his clients' accounts into his own. A warrant was immediately issued for the ex-judge's arrest. By the time police arrived to serve the warrant, John Fairbanks had already vanished. Within 24 hours of the indictment, he staged his disappearance. On December 29, 1989, Fairbanks's pickup truck was found abandoned near his main home, with no sign of him at the scene. The 66-year-old judge had seemingly disappeared into thin air overnight, alongside all of his ill-gotten gains. The sudden disappearance stunned both law enforcement and the community. Newport residents, already reeling from the revelations of Fairbanks's crimes, now had to absorb the shock that their former judge was officially a fugitive from justice. Fairbanks's flight from justice set off a massive investigation spanning multiple states and eventually multiple countries. New Hampshire authorities enlisted the help of federal agents as they chased leads on the missing judge. Early on, there were few solid clues. The case went cold for a time, a major setback for investigators who had worked for 2 years to build the fraud case only to have the suspect slip through their fingers. To generate new leads, law enforcement turned to the public and leveraged the audience of some of the most popular TV shows of the time. In 1991, Unsolved Mysteries featured the case, reenacting the judge's disappearance and asking viewers for tips. The following year, America's Most Wanted also spotlighted Fairbanks. These broadcasts yielded a flurry of calls and sightings, but none led to Fairbanks's capture. Privately, investigators suspected that Fairbanks had fled far beyond New England. With his knowledge of the legal system and access to untold amounts of wealth, he could have established a new identity with relative ease. One theory was that he might have crossed the nearby Canadian border soon after ditching his truck in Maine. However, if that was true, he managed to cover his tracks effectively. For years, every promising lead turned into another dead end. The search for the once respected judge became one of New Hampshire's most frustrating fugitive cases, and locals began to question if he would ever be brought to justice. But the disgraced judge couldn't run forever, and this question was finally answered in the spring of 1994. In late March of that year, Las Vegas police received a call from the sprawling MGM Grand Hotel regarding a guest who hadn't checked out. The guest had checked in under an assumed name a few days earlier and paid for 2 nights, but hadn't vacated the room or responded to staff. On the evening of March 27th, 1994, hotel security entered the locked room and made a grim discovery. The man inside was dead, and a note was taped to the bathroom mirror. It didn't take long for authorities to confirm the man's identity. It was John Fairbanks, ending his 4-year run as a fugitive in a hotel room on the other side of the country. He was 70 years old. Fairbanks had checked into the MGM Grand on March 24th under the alias Richard Mansfield, a false identity he'd been using while on the run. The coroner ruled that he did it by himself, using asphyxiation, bringing the international manhunt to an abrupt end. With Fairbanks's death, investigators began to piece together how he had evaded capture for so long. It turned out Fairbanks had fled to Canada as suspected, and the details of his time on the lam were intriguing. For much of his time on the run, he had been living in Quebec City, in French-speaking Canada, under the Mansfield alias. Posing as a retired history professor from Ottawa, he rented luxury condominium apartments and blended into the community there. He paid cash for everything and lived quietly, avoiding any behavior that might attract attention. What finally drove Fairbanks to surface in Las Vegas remains a matter of speculation. In the days after his death, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office revealed a crucial detail. Fairbanks may have panicked after spotting someone familiar in the casino. Las Vegas was hosting a law enforcement conference that weekend, and among the attendees was one of the very investigators who had pursued Fairbanks's case back in New Hampshire. Authorities believe that Fairbanks, while walking through the bustling MGM Grand Casino, saw the investigator, a face he recognized, and thought the net was closing in. And it's important to remember here that the judge knew many of these investigators on a personal, even friendly level prior to becoming a fugitive. Rather than risk arrest and public humiliation, the judge retreated to his room and made his final decision. Interestingly, of course, the investigator wasn't there on account of the judge at all. It had all been a coincidence. Why the judge was visiting Vegas in the first place also remains an unsolved mystery. Many have questioned why a well-known fugitive who was living in hiding in Canada would have risked crossing the border at all. Even after Fairbanks himself was found, one enormous mystery remained unsolved. Where did all the money go? Investigators had traced roughly $1.8 million in thefts to the former judge, and suspected the true total could be several times that. Despite this, virtually none of the missing money was ever recovered. For Fairbanks's many victims, this was a cruel final twist. Elderly clients who had expected a secure retirement had little hope of regaining their lost savings. But what was perhaps even more sick is that many of his clients were disabled people who had that money held in trust for their care and well-being. In essence, this trusted judge stole what comfort these severely disabled individuals could have expected in their lives in what I can only describe as a disturbed act of a twisted mind. Many have speculated he may have taken out margin loans against the stolen money to invest further in the stock market. When the market crashed in 1987, any of his clients' funds that he had gambled on the market would have lost significant value, and he may have been subject to a margin call. This is when borrowed investments lose value and the broker requires extra cash to meet their requirements. Otherwise, the stocks will be sold at a massive loss. To cover those losses, he may have stolen even more, in a spiral that eventually collapsed under its own weight. In the end, investigators leaned toward a simple if frustrating theory. Fairbanks spent most of the money, and what he didn't spend, he lost using the stock market as a personal casino. Others speculate that Fairbanks's knowledge of estate planning and trusts, could have enabled him to siphon client funds into a labyrinth of offshore entities. By establishing shell companies in jurisdictions with strict banking secrecy laws, say the Cayman Islands or Panama, he could have hidden assets beyond the reach of U.S. investigators. Setting up multi-layered corporate structures would have disguised the true owner of the accounts, making it exceedingly difficult for authorities to trace or repatriate any money. Given the era's limited cross-border cooperation, substantial sums might still lie undiscovered in such accounts. Still others believe that he had a significant gambling problem, which may explain why he risked the trip to Vegas despite being a wanted fugitive. Over many years, he may have been withdrawing from his clients' accounts to fund his gambling addiction, and then continued to withdraw more, believing he could cover these losses. When new money stopped flowing in due to the 1987 market crash, his entire scheme may have collapsed. Whatever the truth is, the whereabouts of the money stolen by Judge John Fairbanks will likely remain an unsolved mystery. The air inside Pete Maxwell's ranch house was thick and still, just after midnight on July 14th, 1881. Outside, in the oppressive New Mexico heat, Lincoln County Sheriff Pat Garrett and his two deputies, John Poe and Thomas McKinney, waited in the shadows. Garrett slipped inside, leaving his men on the porch, and moved through the darkness to Maxwell's bedroom. As he began to question Maxwell about the whereabouts of a certain high-profile fugitive, a figure appeared in the doorway. Barefoot and carrying a butcher knife, the man hadn't come to attack. He just wanted a slice of that sweet late-night beef. He spotted the deputies outside, pulled out his revolver, and recoiled into the dark room, calling out for the men to identify themselves. Then things went eerily quiet for a moment, before two blasts rang out in the dark. There was a brief strangling gasp and then nothing. This was the moment the law and history recorded the death of one of the Old West's most famous outlaws, a man known as Billy the Kid. Yet, for a story that appeared to have been ended with such finality, it refused to stay buried. The very circumstances that Garrett would describe as a stroke of luck were the same ones that made his story vulnerable to doubt. His deputies, waiting outside, were documented to have been initially skeptical that the dead man was the famous outlaw. This ambiguity, born in the same instant as the kid's official death, provided the fertile ground for one of the Old West's most persistent legends. To this day, many question whether Billy the Kid escaped and survived, living on into old age despite all the odds. Before he was a legend, Billy the Kid was Henry McCarty, born in a New York slum to Irish immigrants around 1859. And if you're wondering how he came to be known as Billy, well, by the 1870s, he was going by the alias William Bonney. His early life was a westward drift with his mother Catherine that ended in Silver City, New Mexico. When she died of tuberculosis, as was the style at the time, the orphaned teenager was cast adrift, working odd jobs before his first arrest for stealing cheese. Physically, he wasn't much to look at, but he possessed a disarming charisma. He loved to sing, dance, drink, and gamble to excess, and was described as being the life of the party. He was also fluent in Spanish, which made him fit in much easier with the population of New Mexico. And keep this in mind, because his ability to rizz up local Latinas in Espanol will be a factor when we discuss the claimants to his identity. This charm, however, was paired with a quick and lethal temper. His transformation into a wanted outlaw was forged in the crucible of the Lincoln County feud. This brutal conflict began as a more traditional fight between an established merchant faction, the Murphy-Dolan Company, and a newcomer, John Tunstall. The Kid worked for Tunstall, and when his employer was slain by a posse allied with the Murphy-Dolan faction, he didn't pack it up and go home. He joined a deputized posse called the Regulators to hunt down those who had slain Tunstall, believing he was an agent of justice in a territory where the law was corrupt. The whole thing degenerated into a tit-for-tat slaughter, and eventually the kid cut down a lawman, making him a wanted man. Later, Old West legends would claim he was one of the deadliest outlaws, having taken 21 lives in his 21 years on Earth, though this is now believed to be an exercise in myth building. That said, don't get mistaken and think Billy the Kid wasn't a dangerous man. Despite only making it to our modern drinking age, he was directly involved in the elimination of at least 9 men, and that's just what's been documented and confirmed. After being captured by Pat Garrett and sentenced to hang, the kid cemented his legendary status with a daring escape from the Lincoln County Courthouse. In the process of the escape, he eliminated 2 lawmen, including shooting one of them in the back as he tried to escape. This jailbreak made him a folk hero to some, while others viewed him as a cold-blooded monster who had to be eliminated immediately. Decades after the shots in Maxwell's bedroom, men emerged claiming the story was a lie. The 2 most famous claimants offered compelling, if deeply flawed, narratives that have captivated believers ever since. In 1948, an elderly man in Hyco, Texas, named Brushy Bill Roberts, confessed to a paralegal named William Morrison that he was the real Billy the Kid. Roberts, then allegedly around 90 years old, claimed he was tired of hiding and wanted Morrison's help to secure a pardon for his actions. His evidence was based on personal testimony. He allegedly showed Morrison 26 scars from bullet and knife wounds that matched injuries the kid had supposedly sustained. He also possessed an intimate knowledge of the Lincoln County conflict, and Morrison managed to secure sworn affidavits from a few surviving acquaintances of the kid. According to Roberts, Garrett's posse had mistakenly ended the life of an innocent man named Billy Barlow on the night in question. In this version of events, Billy the Kid took this opportunity to escape and assume a new identity, eventually transforming into Brushy Bill the Prospector. However, the case for Brushy Bill quickly falls apart under scrutiny. Most historians dismiss the claim, pointing to a family Bible that records his birth year as 1879, which would have made him a toddler when the kid died. Further, despite Brushy Bill claiming to have 26 battle scars, Billy the Kid was only shot once, and was never recorded to have been stabbed. Billy was definitely more of a giver than a taker when it came to combat wounds, but Brushy Bill didn't seem to get the memo on that part. Notably, Billy the Kid was literate, while Brushy Bill was not. Further, Billy the Kid spoke Spanish at a native level fluency, and he is well documented as having used this linguistic proficiency to win over the local ladies and chill with bad hombres. Further, Roberts had previously claimed to be a member of the Jesse James gang, suggesting a pattern of adopting notorious identities. Some modern analyses even propose his case was an extreme form of celebrity worship, where his own identity had merged with that of the famous outlaw he admired. In essence, he was so obsessed with these Wild West figures that he may have developed a real, though completely delusional belief that he was one of them. Notably, the corpses of the man who Pat Garrett said was Billy the Kid and Brushy Bill are still available for testing, though the authorities have blocked exhumation efforts. The claim of John Miller is more mysterious and is built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence and secondhand stories. Miller, a farmer who died in Arizona in 1937, never made a public claim, but friends and family insisted he was the kid. According to them, he wouldn't admit it when sober, but when he got absolutely blotto, he would sing like a canary. Crucially, there are almost no official records of a John Miller existing before August 1881, less than a month after the kid's supposed death. Unlike Brushy Bill, John Miller was actually fluent in Spanish and was also literate. After his passing, his Mexican-American wife confirmed his ability to speak Spanish at a native level and also attested to his ability to slip out of handcuffs. Billy the Kid had famously slipped out of cuffs on a couple of occasions. And yeah, I'm just going to leave that last bit right there and not make the obvious joke about what this couple might have been getting up to in their private lives. While the stories of Roberts and Miller are interesting and have a lot of popular support, the historical consensus supports the official account of the kid's death. This conclusion rests not on folklore, but on the weight of contemporary evidence. The single most powerful document is the coroner's jury report, filed the day after the shooting. A jury of local men, many of whom knew the kid personally, examined the body and identified it as William Bonney. This legal document, created at the time of the event, is the bedrock of the historical record. While this would be definitive if we were talking about a document issued today, it's a bit less definitive than you might think. This was after all the Wild West, and Pat Garrett and his posse had $500 riding on this jury, determining the body was that of Billy. In a time and place where the line between lawman and outlaw could change back and forth with stunning rapidity, the jury may have been pressured to just go along with the identification. Beyond the inquest, an official paper trail confirms the government acted on the certainty of the kid's death. Records show the New Mexico Attorney General and the governor approved the $500 reward payment to Pat Garrett on the basis of the coroner's jury report. According to those who believe the official narrative, these bureaucratic actions would not have occurred if there were any credible doubt about the identity of the deceased. Garrett also made a crucial strategic move by putting the body on public display in Fort Sumner. In an era without modern forensics, visual identification by the community was the highest standard of proof. That said, decomposition in the heat is a very real problem, and to what extent the body actually resembled Billy the Kid at the time of this event is unknown.